When I was 19, I entered into a relationship that would change the course of my life forever. I ended up moving away from my family, hours away from my family, to go to college, and my boyfriend at the time followed me, and when he did, I began to feel more trapped. Those red flags turned into controlling manipulation, and I really internalized the guilt and shame that came with that. And we ended up getting engaged and then married, and I was experiencing verbal and emotional abuse. Things went from bad to worse, and I still felt ashamed, and I still felt very guilty. And I also began to feel very angry and bitter about my situation. And I realized that it was easier for me to lie. It was easier for me to lie to my husband about where I was or what I was doing to avoid his anger and the consequences of that. And as lies tend to do, they went from small ones and got bigger and bigger. And after several years of marriage, I felt entangled in a web of sin that I just did not know how to get out of. I was extremely far from God, and I was unfaithful in my marriage. My husband found out about my infidelity, and I thought I had hit rock bottom. I had never felt more ashamed or guilty in my entire life, and because of the extreme guilt, I felt that I had to go back and try in my marriage, and that was the only way I could right my wrong. And as I was driving back home, I've never been more scared in my life, and all I wanted to do was die. I knew all I had to do on that highway was pull my wheel sharply to the right, and I could run into a tree and end my misery, and all the pain would be over. But thankfully, God saved me in that moment, and He continued to save me through the next several months, which were the most trying and terrible time of my entire life, when the abuse got worse than it had ever been. I remember my first glimmer of hope in that situation is when I had to call and confess to my parents what I had done, because the rest of my family knew. And I was telling my mom the most shameful thing I've ever done through just uncontrollable sobs, and I'll never forget what she said to me. She said, "Stephanie, there is nothing that you could do to make me love you less." And I knew that if my mom, who is a mere human, could still love me through what I had done, that God could still love me through what I had done, and that His plan for me was greater. And after I made the excruciating decision to divorce, I chose to move to Jacksonville to be closer to my family. I was broken, completely raw, and very vulnerable, but I was alive, and I knew that I had God to thank for that. And I will never forget sitting in my Camry on I-10 on the way to Jacksonville and saying, "Okay, God, you can have it all. I surrender my life to you. You have control over my finances. You have control over my talents and abilities. You have control over my time. And I am going to go to church every single Sunday until I find the place where you want me to be. And when I find it, I am going to serve there." So a few months later, God led me to TheCity.church, and I knew as soon as I walked in the door, that's where God wanted me to be. Wanted to serve, but my guilt and shame over being divorced weighed so heavily on my heart that I couldn't bring myself to do it. And I talked to Blake and Sierra later that week and confessed to them that I was divorced, and I will never forget what Blake said to me. He said, "God prefers broken over polished any day, because He can work with broken pieces and put them back together." So I began serving at TheCity.church on the worship team, and that's where I got to know this amazing man, Joel, who is the most Christ-like, giving person I've ever met in my life. And of course, I fell head over heels in love with him almost immediately. And for some crazy reason, even knowing all of my past, he loved me too. And this past October, God gave me another chance at marriage on one of the happiest days of my life. And I'm so thankful for God's redemption and everything that He's done to bless me and to bless us now in our marriage. And we're overjoyed to announce that we are expecting a baby in September. So God has taken me from a place where I wanted to die to a place that I have new life inside of me. And I'm so grateful for everything that He's done in my life. And you couldn't have paid me to believe that this is where I would be later on after I went through all of the stuff that I went through.